In the year 1993, a man and his fiancée were driving on the road when they were involved in a seriously bad car accident. Afterwards, the man was pronounced dead at the scene and taken to a morgue, while his fiancée was sent to a hospital to recuperate. The only problem is that he wasn't actually dead. This is the top 4 strange but true horror stories.
Hello, horror friend, and welcome to another back-to-back horror stories, where we tell you a few different strange and/or creepy stories back-to-back. Today's video is about a series of different creepy subjects, all the way from almost being buried alive to a morbid real-life recreation of Weekend at Bernie's. And what all these stories have in common is that they're 100% true.
Now make sure to stick around until the end of the video, so that way you'll understand why it's important to always wait for your food to finish cooling off before eating it. Seriously, never eat really hot food. I'm telling you. But anyway, guys, let's get started.
For our first story today, we're heading to the quiet little town of Paragould, Arkansas. Paragould has a light population density of only 30,000 people over 31 square miles. It's best known for being home to the Crowley's Ridge State Park, where visitors can go camping, hiking, and fishing. But a few years ago, Paragould was the site of a strange and disturbing crime. It all started in early 2016 when a 36-year-old man by the name of Alan Troba desperately needed a place to stay. After searching around for a little while, he soon stumbled across a little old lady who was renting out a room in her house. This lady's name was Gloria Marie Tensley, and she was 65 years old. When the two of them met, Alan introduced himself to Gloria, and from the outside, she seemed to be very kind and sweet and, just your typical grandmother. But as we all know, looks can be deceiving. The moment Alan moved in, he started helping Gloria out with basic chores such as mowing the lawn, washing dishes, paying bills, and fixing the hot water heater. And for the next 3 months, everything was just business as usual. But one thing Alan couldn't help but notice, even from the first moment he entered the home, was really just this bad smell circulating all around the place. Now, initially, he just assumed that it was because of the gross but true fact that the entire home was filled with roaches, bed bugs, and rotten food. Which, by the way, really makes you wonder how desperate he was for a place to stay if that was the type of stuff he was willing to put up with. But anyway, I digress. Eventually, at some point, Alan and Gloria had a serious discussion about a room in the back of the home that he was explicitly not allowed to enter under any circumstances. Now, Gloria never really gave him a good reason why. She just said it was off limits, repeatedly telling him, whatever you do, don't go back there. However, after 3 months of living at Gloria's home, curiosity ultimately got the best of Alan. One day on July 19th, when Gloria was away, he entered the back room and was met with an absolutely putrid smell. A smell even worse than the rest of the house. And this room he entered also had to have been the dirtiest of them all. I mean, everywhere he looked, he saw piles of trash and newspapers, just old dusty knickknacks and furniture. And in order to make his way through it, he was forced to clear a path, and pretty soon he saw something weird lying on the ground. After first bending down and pulling the blanket off of it, Alan quickly made what turned out to be a terrifying and shocking discovery. This thing lying there turned out to be a rotten, dead corpse on the ground near his feet. At this point, Alan immediately became distraught and horrified. And so he ran out of the room, got on the phone, and contacted the local police department. When the police arrived, they identified the body as none other than Gloria Marie Tensley's last boyfriend, a 78-year-old Native American man by the name of Clarence Chenoweth. And so unbeknownst to Alan, for 3 months, he had been sleeping right next to this dead man. And so after police identified the body, the 65-year-old Gloria was then arrested and charged with abuse of a corpse and fraud. Later on, when authorities did an autopsy of the body, they learned that Clarence had died of an illness, but he had been dead for over a year just lying there in Gloria's back room. And during her interview with police, Gloria admitted to keeping Clarence's dead body in order to continue receiving his monthly Social Security checks. And ultimately, she was found guilty of both charges she was accused of. Apparently, Gloria Marie Tensley wasn't just a sweet little old lady, after all.
The next story takes place south of the equator in a charming old country known as South Africa. Naturally, South Africa is located on the southernmost part of the African continent. It has a rich history and a surprisingly diverse range of different climates and geographic landforms. all the way from desert area to wide open plains, valleys, and mountainous cliffs. And of course, you can't forget the beautiful coastline as well. But in 1993, this country was the backdrop to a strange and disturbing incident. On March 13th of that year, a 24-year-old man by the name of Saifo William Medlechi was enjoying just recently having been engaged to his fiancée. The two of them were from the township of Sebakang, just south of Johannesburg. While driving on the road in a busy intersection, Saifo and his fiancée crashed into another vehicle and were involved in an extremely bad car accident. When paramedics arrived on the scene, Saifo's injuries appeared to be pretty bad. By every metric, it seemed like there was no way that anyone could have survived this type of crash. After checking his vital signs, the authorities soon declared Saifo dead, and his body was sent to a nearby morgue. But the only problem was that despite the way it looked, Saifo wasn't actually dead at all. So the next day, he woke up trapped inside of a metal box in a morgue with no idea where he was. Meanwhile, his fiancée was sent to a hospital to recuperate from her injuries and informed of the tragedy by the local authorities. For the next few days, Saifo was then lying in the morgue, drifting in and out of consciousness, banging on the metal above and repeatedly crying for help. This went on for over 48 hours, until eventually one of the workers thought that they heard a scream coming from the other room. Then they went over, opened up the morgue, and found a dehydrated corpse screaming and yelling with tears in its eyes. At first, they were astonished by what they were seeing, but shortly after, a few more workers came in, they gave Saifo some water, and he explained to them the situation. To everyone in the room, this was extremely baffling. They were all thinking, how could such a thing have happened? Here you have a guy who's clearly alive, and yet he's sitting in a morgue. Eventually, Saifo left the morgue though and paid a visit to his fiancée who was recuperating in the hospital. But the response he got from her was not exactly the one he was expecting. Right away, she began screaming for help from the nurses and shouting at Saifo, accusing him of being a zombie. Repeatedly, Saifo tried telling her that it was all just a misunderstanding and he was alive the entire time. But his fiancée just wouldn't believe him. Later on, after he left, she told the hospital employees that he had come back to haunt her. And this rejection really hurt Saifo emotionally. So in the end, Saifo found himself alone with a broken heart and a broken car. How sad.
In April of 2019, a 51-year-old man by the name of Darren Hickey was soon about to be part of a freak accident. Darren worked as the manager at a wedding venue in Lancashire, England. Lancashire is a county in England that covers an area of over 1,000 square miles, 80% of which is rural, meaning that it's filled with farmland and green pastures and cows and stuff. Now, the part of the county that Darren's shop was located in, though, is called Chorley, and the name of the place is the Ridgeman House. Here's a real-life image of what it looks like. There, Darren helped to manage a business attracting brides and grooms of all different sorts. In addition, the place had an in-house chef and a bunch of people whose job it was to help prepare the food and scenery. Darren really enjoyed working here, and it was certainly a big upgrade from where he was only 7 years before. That's because sometime in 2012, he suffered from a really debilitating stroke, and it left him practically unable to walk or speak or do anything. For years, though, he worked hard on his recovery and started devoting a tremendous amount of time and effort into charitable acts. So much so that Darren even ended up receiving the Inspirational Person of Courage Award by the Stroke Association. I mean, this guy was really a good person with a big heart. And by now, he was almost back to 100%. So all in all, this final chapter of Darren's life was truly just a great comeback story. But pretty soon, that story was about to come to a close. On April 4th of 2019, Darren was getting ready to leave the Ridgeman house when the chef there asked him if he would try out a fish cake that had just come out of the oven. Evidently, Darren liked fish cake, because not all of us do. These were really hot. I mean, so hot that you could literally still see the steam rising up for them. But regardless, Darren wasn't really trying to wait around any longer to leave, so he figured what the heck, and he tried the fish cake in its current form. And unfortunately, this turned out to be the biggest mistake of his entire life. Shortly after trying the fish cake, Darren started to feel a little bit of burn at the back of his throat. At first, it wasn't really that bad, so he just returned home and rested for a bit. But over the next several hours, however, This pain soon became exponentially worse. Darren then spoke with his partner Neil Parkinson about the pain in his throat, and together the two of them decided Darren would need to visit the emergency room. They then drove up together to the urgent care ward at Chorley Hospital, and there the staff did an examination of Darren's throat and tongue, but strangely enough, they were unable to find any evidence of a burn at all. It was almost as if nothing had even happened to him. So they just prescribed Darren some painkillers and sent him back home. After that, he apparently felt well enough to return to work, so he drove back to the Richmond house and got right back to what he was doing before, which consisted of, helping things to run smoothly, talking to the staff, and dishing out orders. At some point, though, Darren once again began feeling a tremendous amount of pain in his throat, so he went into a room in the house where he could rest for a bit. At 9:45 p.m., Darren's partner Neil heard him making noises and shouting, and so he ran upstairs to check on him. But when Neil entered the room, he saw Darren choking. So immediately he tried using the Heimlich maneuver on him. But after a period of time, it became obvious that it just wasn't going to work. Afterwards, Neil and his staff just made the decision to call in an ambulance. Now, due to a bizarre problem with the postcode of the building, though, the ambulance was delayed for about 5 minutes. When the paramedics arrived, Darren was already in critical condition. They attempted to treat him at the scene and rushed him to the hospital, but by then it was already too late. Darren Hickey passed away in the early hours of April 5, 2019, at Royal Bolton Hospital. His partner Neil and the entire staff at the Richmond house were utterly shocked and devastated. But after an autopsy was done on Darren's body, they soon finally discovered exactly what had happened to him. So apparently, when Darren ate the fish cake, it burned the back of his throat, eventually causing his entire voice box and larynx to swell up significantly. So much so that it made him unable to breathe, and he died from asphyxiation. Apparently, when the staff at the emergency care room had examined him during his visit there, they were unable to see any damage simply because of how far it was back in his throat. All in all, it was a terrible tragedy and an incredibly rare occurrence. But it does teach us a valuable lesson. Make sure you wait for your food to cool off before eating it. No taste test is more valuable than your life.
The movie Weekend at Bernie's is about a couple of friends who parade around their dead boss's body, acting like he's still alive. Depending on your taste, it's a weird yet entertaining film. But despite its popularity, very few people know that a similar thing actually happened in real life. In the year 2011, two men from Denver, Colorado took their dead friend's body out for a joyride. Now, Denver, Colorado is a very famous city dating all the way back to the Old West era. The area it's located in sits at a high elevation, and the people are very unique and interesting. One of the most prominent parts of the city is, of course, the nearby Rocky Mountains, which are absolutely stunningly beautiful. But on August 27th of 2011, something was about to happen there that was not so beautiful, to say the least. Later in the evening of that day, a 43-year-old man by the name of Robert Young went to his friend Jeffrey's house to pay him a visit. After entering, he found Jeffrey lying unconscious on a couch and completely unresponsive. Right away, it became obvious that his friend wasn't just sleeping. Something was terribly wrong with him. However, instead of calling the police or an ambulance, Robert decided to drive up to a restaurant where their mutual friend Mark worked at and break the news to him. When Robert went in, he ran up to Mark while he was busy working and told him that there was quote-unquote something wrong with Jeffrey. Mark Robinson was a 25-year-old waiter at the time, and he was really just a bit thrown off. But after talking between the two of them, Robert explained the situation to him. Then they decided to head back to Jeffrey's house to check on him. Once they got there, they went inside and found Jeffrey still lying there unresponsive. They tried to see if they could get him to move, but ultimately their efforts proved ineffective. So together, the two of them came up with a brilliant idea. It was to take their dead friend's body with them while they went around town and used his credit card. Now, exactly why they felt the need to take Jeffrey's corpse with them instead of just taking his credit card is anyone's guess. But regardless, Robert and Mark then worked together to lift their dead friend's body in the back of Mark's SUV. Afterwards, they drove to a Teddy T's Bar and Grill, and while they were there, they left Jeffrey in the back of the vehicle and used his credit card to pay for a bunch of drinks. This lasted for about an hour, and they were just sitting there drinking and talking to people and having a bunch of fun. But when they were finished here, they found themselves a bit hungry. So they headed up to Sam's number 3 diner and ordered a bunch of food. Next, they drove to a gas station where they filled up Mark's tank once again with the use of Jeffrey's credit card. Then they returned to Jeffrey's house, unloaded his body, carried it inside, and placed it on his bed, like nothing ever happened. But even up to this point, they apparently still hadn't got the partying out of their system. So after stopping somewhere to eat again, this time a restaurant called Viva Burrito, the two of them went into town to an ATM and cashed out $400 from Jeffrey's bank account. They then used this money at a popular Denver strip club known as Shotgun Willie's. Shotgun Willie's serves food, drinks, and entertainment, and needless to say, Robert and Mark got their fair share of that here. By the time they left, it was around 4 a.m., and they were incredibly intoxicated. One of them, it's not clear whether it was Robert or Mark, soon blurted out to a valet that the two of them had spent their entire night driving around with their dead friend's body in the car while using his credit card. Whoever it was then repeated this to a police officer, and the police officer told his superiors. When the police arrived at Jeffrey's home, they found his dead body, and shortly afterwards, Robert and Mark were arrested. Jeffrey Jarrett was officially pronounced deceased at 43 years old. When an autopsy was later done on his body, the authorities determined that he had died from a lethal combination of drugs and alcohol. Regardless, Mark Rubinson was charged with abuse of a corpse, while Robert Young was charged with the same thing, plus identity theft. During their trial, Jeffrey Jarrett's family was pretty forgiving and allowed the two to agree to a plea deal. Ultimately, they both just ended up serving probation and had to send a written apology to the family. Oh yeah, and they were ordered to go to therapy, something they obviously needed.